Bones, Diamonds, and Time by Noclipper. Within the graveyard, pale bones lay in haphazard rings, placed with desperate haste. Dozens of gems shone in the darkness with the light of eldritch stars. Blood bound the components together, traced into words wiser minds never write. Circles of sourceless green fire slowly rotated, defining an enormous dome. Within the arcane prison, an endless being screamed. Its form writhed in smoke and fire. Images of skeletons and terror flashed within, as a law of the world was bound by unwavering will wielding stolen power. The prisoner fought back with fire and ice. It released against the invisible walls every frequency of radiation, even twisting the fabric of space within as it tried to escape, all in vain. Finally, it surrendered to its fate, simmering as it was waiting for its captor to wane. Smoke cleared, leaving a skeleton of winged dragon crouched within the circles of bones. It stared down at the one who had been summoned, and for now, bounded with pinpoints of blue light within the void of sockets which had never truly contained eyes. It waited, and it had all the time in the worlds.
Ha! I did it! That last bit of space folding might have fooled the others, but I grew up with the pony who wrote the book in teleportation.
A small purple figure declared triumphantly, before suddenly sitting down in shock.
I did it!
Yes, you are not the first to do so. It is not that great of an achievement.
The voice roared into the captor's head, without bothering to consult his ears. He dug a claw into one ear, scratching it around in surprise. Diamond clad will nearly cracking from the message.
Whoa, neat trick! Have you ever met a unicorn named Trixie? She loved that for her act.
I meet everybody once.
The skeletal figure thought for a moment.
With the occasional encore.
Nice evasion, big guy, but that's not why you're here.
He gave a small cough, a feather of green flame escaping to join the circle like a circling insect.
Of course not. You desire power over me. You desire me to take your enemies before their time and leave to you be beyond yours.
Death gave a dramatic spread of its massive arms, hands pressing against the opposite side of the cage he bravely sat in. The dragon sneered, swiping the air in a rebuke.
That's stupid! I've made no enemies, and those who made me their enemy I destroyed, usually by making them our friend.
The skeletal head tilted it to the side, actually taking in the figure before him, seeing the dragon-hide tome which held his captor's story, and read the spine of the tome aloud.
Spike!
Don't wear it out,
he growled, lips curling to show his teeth in contempt, sharp fangs which had only once drawn life's blood.
Not even 100 seasons old. Most of your kind take at least 1,000 seasons before they have power and desire enough to summon me.
My kind? Do you mean the dragons? I wasn't shaped by dragons. I was just born as one. When I went to the Dragonlands, I saw just how shallow and horrid they could be. The strong gluttonous hoarding gems, the weak killing other beings or each other, just because they felt like it.
That is the circle of life.
Well, the circle of life is wrong. Things shouldn't be like that.
Is it not wrong? Is it not right? It just is.
You would say that.
I did say that.
Death smiled down at the purple dragon. Frozen rows of teeth which had devoured worlds shone in the light green.
I am a law on every world. Even the changeless eventually meet me. In the end, I devour even myself.
Spike ground his teeth in frustration. The being was toying with him, taunts to distract him from his original goal. They were working.
In that case, you're hardly any special then. You haven't done anything interesting. I've flown around the world. I've studied most of my life by the hooves of Celestia, and the best student she's ever had. I've been into space and to the ocean's depths. I learned the secrets of dozens of lost or buried tomes. I've starved myself of meat so I can bear look at myself in the mirror and given up every treasure I've found, but the knowledge, so I can recognize the face in it. I dared the sideways Fey realms once, and I returned. He paused in his rant of achievements, anger filling him as his tiny voice told him after each that it still wasn't enough. I've seen enough to know what's right and wrong, and I've learned enough to fix this wrong. Now show me what I've called you here to see.
The skeletal dragon gave a small sigh, despite lacking the required organs to do so, and smoke curled out of its maw. The smoke spun around the being, as if not sure where to go, before gathering into the taloned hands and coalescing into a pair of hourglasses. The larger sat top-heavy, ornate scaled frame holding a pair of kissing glass bulbs, each large enough for the young dragon to fit within. The top bulb was so full it left him aghast, and even though the shields of the prison he could smell the finest diamond dust trickling through the gap of now into the comparably minuscule pile of yesterday. The golden plaque upon its base, large enough to fit a proper dragon's name over twice, held 5 crudely carved letters in the style of a young filly who had awoken and named him only a few short decades ago. The second was so much smaller, pinched between the two talons, an ivory white frame displayed in an elegantly inscripted name upon the base, flying cursively like a ribbon in the wind. A glance filled him with joy and sorrow in equal measure. Like confirming they were kindred spirits, the second lifetimer contained the same fine pure diamond dust, yet at the same time her hour was almost upon them. Only a few carats of the precious time remained nestled up against the now, while glittering powder fell lifelessly to the half-bulb below.
How long until?
Spike asked, unable to articulate the question properly.
17 days, precisely, now.
Now, fill hers with mine. I know you can. She needs it more than me, he demanded, staring up with self-loathing at the unfair amount of time ahead her small life could fit within his dozens of times. He couldn't think of a better way to spend his own life, and she deserved so much more. But the dragon who towered over him simply shook his head in refusal.
I will not interfere directly in a life. I will neither lengthen nor shorten one.
Fine! Leave them and go. I'll figure out how to do it myself.
I will not directly assist or interfence.
It's not fair! 17 days isn't enough!
He roared like a mouse at a lion.
How much is enough?
Creaking bones shifted as Death repositioned himself within the cage, as if smugly suggesting that he'd won the debate with his question. After seriously considering the question, Spike pointed a small talon up at his life timer.
Half of that, plus 8.5 days, he declared.
A quiet laugh filled the young dragon's mind.
Perhaps that is the correct answer. Nevertheless, I will not interfere directly. My sole purpose is to collect when the time has come, not to change that time. Bargains, threats, bribes, they are all meaningless to me. I will not interfere directly.
Spike looked at the small life-timer, a strange literalization of the abstract idea. Tiny dark purple gems embedded within the frame hinted about one possibility.
I could turn her into a dragon, maybe. It's not that hard since I'm already one. Would that give her a longer life?
17 days. as a mayfly, 17 days as a unicorn, 17 days as a dragon.
Spike roared at the beast who towered over him, holding 2 of the lives that mattered to him like they were mere toys.
Why? You have so much power to make the world a better place, and yet you sit here like it's all a game.
He wiped tears from his face, despair leaking through his anger.
If you won't save her, who can?
Telling you would be interfering directly.
The bony head looked up at the night sky, almost like it was contemplating.
Even if you prevent her untimely death, her final hour will still come.
Spike felt a sparkle of hope and looked up at the tiny precious hourglass, realizing just how much space remained in the unicorn's potential past. The heap of diamond dust barely filled half of it. There was room for so much more time. It just wasn't there to spend.
Why is she like this?
He asked in a whimper, feeling like a confused child again. Yelling from the forest distracted him, and he turned to somebody calling his name. A gasping unicorn broke through the undergrowth, apparently seeing him easier than he could be seen.
Spike! I've been looking everywhere for you.
She panted as she loped into the clearing of the small graveyard and froze mid-step. Twilight looked at her faithful assistant in absolute horror. Spike gulped. He was already a match for her scythe, but between them, the unicorn probably still outclassed him in power, ready at a moment's notice. He looked from her to the now empty prison. Her intrusion had been enough distraction to let the endless being slip away. A tiny voice in his head, normally forced into silence, demanded that the unicorn be destroyed for disrupting the ritual. A flash of the young mare, as a much younger pony embraced him, crushed the dark voice.
I can explain,
he said quickly, looking down at the dozen desecrated skeletons briefly, feeling more sick at the sight of them now than when he had dug them up.
The blood's mine. I didn't hurt any pony.
Twilight Sparkle stood agape, trembling in instinctive fear at the sight of her kind's bones, surrounded by the blood and gems. She looked up at the dragon. She's still a child despite his age and power, where he had clawed at his own scales, dried blood trailing down his arm.
Spike,
She took a step back.
I know how much you care for her, but this is wrong. Rarity wouldn't want you to do this for her. I wouldn't want you to do this for me.
Spike rubbed at his face to avoid meeting her horror-filled eyes.
I know. I'll still do anything within my power to save her, or you, or any of my friends.
He stood, his short bipedal stature matching the height of his adoptive family.
Even if saving you makes you hate me for it.
He fled into the night, feeling space try to twist around him. Spike fought back, his draconian will preventing him from popping to where Twilight desired him to be. Once again, he escaped from her range. He rose into the night air. The draconian magic had roots in blood, fire, and death. Timeless beyond reckoning, it comes from an era where they ruled complete world with terror and flames. Spike knew this all too well, from the horrified knowledge he had brought back from his brief journeys to the realms he had once naively considered his homelands. If Spike had given in to the dark hunger within, tempting him to hunt the beings Twilight had taught him to love, he could access so many untapped currents of power, few of his species would be his superior. His desire for acceptance and love from his adoptive family had made him shun nearly all of the power, knowing he'd never enact such rituals. But one simple spell from his race, which many of his kind had been born with it already bound within, had almost broken through his pacifist will. When he confessed to Twilight just how much it meant to him, and how he was afraid he might actually do it, Twilight hadn't laughed as he feared. Instead, she saw it as a challenge to be overcome, and helped create an option that compromised between his desire to be a complete dragon, but still have his self-respect. She had helped him twist the blood ritual of wing birth, dismantling the spell as easy as a poem. With the help of all 6 of his greatest friends, he brought down one of the oldest trees within the Everfree Forest. Its ancient life force fueled the spell, along with the friendship that bound him to a philosophy of life which most dragons laughed at. And now he used their emerald gift to escape the scene of a horror scene of his own making. As he fled towards Canterlot, part of his mind was afraid that he was heading towards the future with an even worse diorama with him as the author. He approached Canterlot Castle. The Night Watch spotted his unique outline. As he approached the high air yard, well-drilled troops quickly marched into position, light armor of Royal Air Guard glinting in the torchlight. When he landed, a loud resonating intoning came from within the entrance of the inner hall.
Explain thyself, foul beast of fire! Thou darest approach our heart of power under the cover of night? Speak fast, or I face annihilation.
Spike did not mean to laugh. It just slipped out.
Hi, Luna,
he managed to say before another brief bout of hysteria overcame him.
That would be Princess Luna to the likes of...
A dark figure stepped into the torchlight, her words breaking off as she recognized the figure not as an impertinent scout, but as a declared friend of Equestria. Her speech quickly shifted to a much more feminine tone, filled with concern.
Spike? Is that you? What happened? You're hurt! What did you do?
Her star-filled mane billowed around her as she ran out to assist the small dragon. Before she reached him, she pulled up short, nose wrinkling up.
You smell like their magic. Like something burned and died, but worse.
A royal shoe rose to wave at her face. Luna looked quite rattled as she tried to push away what to her was a bad smell. Spike sighed, realizing that explaining might not get him the help he wanted, but evading the question could be just as bad, so he barreled on through.
Rarity's dying. Just fading away. Nobody knows why. I used dragon magic to try and help. I dug up old bones and I used my own blood rather than hurt anybody to do it. I summoned some sort of embodiment of death. It said she was going to die really soon. In a matter of days.
He took a few deep breaths, opting not to share just how long the figure had told him.
But it's untimely. Half of her life is just missing. She's not supposed to die.
Luna looked resigned, knowing how pointless it was to rebuke him for his actions in his current state of desperation. I'm sure Twilight will fix it. She always does. She smiled down at Spike. The small dragon stood up only up to her shoulders. Luna was one of the only 2 ponies who could still tower over him.
I'm sure if any pony could find out what's wrong, it's her. You should go back to her before she starts to worry.
Spike waved his arms about, refusing to accept such platitudes.
She's been doing all she can, and even stopped asking me for assistance. I think I can only think of 2 that surpass her skill, and one of them is treating me like an ignorant fool. I'm going to do everything I can, even if Twilight or some pony else fixes Rarity in the end. If you can't help her, take me to your sister, tonight. Time is of the essence, and I won't waste more than I have to.
The princess gave a small frown, nearly refusing, because, of course, her sister was already asleep. Finally, she nodded, walking around him as she headed inside. Her tail of stars tickled at the purple scales as she swept him along.
Power to move the moon, and you can you play escort duty,
she muttered under her breath with self-deprecating amusement. The royal bedchambers unsealed at the touch of Luna's horn, and while the guards who loyally stood to each side eyed Spike suspiciously, they didn't impede his entry when Luna ushered him in.
Tia, You've got a guest. Sorry about waking you so late. The majesty of Princess Celestia was perhaps dampened by the dim room, but by no means reduced. She had plenty of experience of keeping up her carefully managed image in worse times than a rude awakening. With a touch of her at her face to help her wake up, she turned about on the large bed.
Good evening, Luna. I understand. And I trust you wouldn't wake me if it wasn't important.
As her eyes found the strange guest, her expression turned somber, her face showing that she already knew why the dragon had led one dragon campaign all the way to the highest power of the land.
Spike, you've grown again.
Spike gulped.
A bit.
He looked at his feet, only able to hold the gaze of the princesses for a few seconds.
Rarity's done so much for the both of you. She's one of the last ponies who deserves to fade away like this.
He nervously fidgeted, feeling the intent princesses silent of praising him as he rubbed at the dried blood on his scaled arm.
Rarity has served Equestria well, both as elder of one of the elements and as a firm-hooved pony. I am quite aware of that,
She stated diplomatically, obviously calculated to futilely soften the blow. Spike's claws tensed in anger, already knowing where she was headed.
However, she is mortal, and her life is nearly spent. Each being has the life they are allotted, and no more.
Spike held up his hand, covered with the specks of dried blood, robbed of his cheek and scales.
And I've more life than I can bear to think about. The one useful thing I learned from summoning death was that Rarity had plenty of room for decades more of her life force. She just doesn't have it in her. I do. I just can't figure out how to reach or move it around with the time I have left.
Luna let out an undignified whinny of laughter before composing herself.
Spike, that would burn her up faster than if you tried to give her a lung of your blood. Everyone's unique. She would reject even if her sister's life force, violently. Celestia stared at her younger sister outburst in such a serious discussion, but she never voiced an opinion, preferring to focus rather than digress.
We will all hurt when she passes, especially if need of her element arises before a new bearer is located. I suspect they will all need to be attuned to new bearers together.
Spike shook in place, the talons upon his feet gouged into the soft wooden floor.
You only care for her as a bearer? She's part of your secret weapon, so you look out for her, but now that she actually needs your help, you just give up and look for her replacement before she's even gone?
He felt sick at the idea. At least the other dragons just saw the rest of life as food or ignorable, not as a disposable weapon.
I know you can heal her. I see how you've cheated the system. Surely you can get Rarity around it as well.
Celestia shook her head, the softly billowing pastel aurora spreading out as it shook free.
The cost is too great. I must put the needs of Equestria and the world above any one pony, even one of the element bearers, even above my sister, as you well know. Perhaps someday I will have to place the needs of the world above my continued existence. I am sorry, but that is not today.
The small dragon turned away from his last hope, claws slamming into the door, but his weakening self-control managed to prevent them from gouging the wood more than the small dents the impact had made.
I could find a way to take it from you. I can already see the shape of the power and the bindings, and there's still time to build what I need. It would take a lot of blood to make the unbinding without the Twilight's help. I'm begging you, please don't abandon her. I don't want to kill again.
Through clenched eyelids, tears leaked, and he pressed his face against the hard wooden floor, trying to wipe them away with the hard wood as memories of his friend simply being beside him at the time he had felt truly alone shone as bright as if he was reliving them.
Spike, citizen of Equestria, hear me well, for I shall not repeat myself.
The words hit him like a hammer blows, and he turned about to see Princess Celestia that was far grander than he had expected. Dimmed was the majestic pony with ivory white body and peaceful pastel mane. The shape she wore to her subject could look upon her and not fear. For the briefest instant, the princess shone like she was on fire. No, like she was plasma. Spike covered his eyes, looking away his other senses as he felt them overwhelmed. As his head spun, part of him recalled all the protective measures he needed to take on his quickly aborted flight to the moon. The vacuum had been the easy part, compared to all the other things the sun threw out that the planet could no longer protect him from. His senses struggled to recalibrate for a few minutes from the mere instant of her naked power. When she spoke again, it was her normal calm tone, yet each word was carefully enunciated.
I can forgive your discourtesy given the current events, but understand, I have not survived this long by ignoring threats to my life or position.
When she saw that the small dragon blinking away tears and a vision obscuring afterimage, she saw what she was really dealing with. A scared adolescent who had just learned enough to be properly afraid for some pony he loved.
Spike,
She sighed.
think it through. Suppose you went down there and offered it all to her. A life as long as the sun's, and enough power to move it. All she has to do is accept it, and know how you freed the power for her. What happens next? Do you think she'll thank you for usurping me?
Spike shook his head, but he still stood firm.
No. She'll probably be so scared of what I did, she'd hate me forever. But she'd be alive. I'll save my friends, even if it means I'll have to leave them.
Luna stepped forward, trying to place a hoof on his shoulder, but he backed away from the touch.
Look at yourself, Spike. You're the only dragon in the world who believes harmony between all things is desirable, and live its ideals better than many ponies do. You struggle to be kind to every living creature despite your nature. Even when the truth hurts, you stay honest and true. Generosity has become part of your very nature. The one thing in your hoard is information, and even that you share with those who need it. Yet, even the separate aspects must be kept in harmony with each other. Honesty must be tempered with kindness. Laughter without friendship is empty. Your loyalty to Rarity is blinding you to so much. If you would shatter her to save her. Luna opted to sit rather than to reach to touch the volatile Spike again, leaning to rest the side of her head against an upraisal sandal. You're willing to save her at the cost of your friendship, even your citizenship. But are you willing to save her at the cost of Rarity hating herself for what you did in her name?
In his imagination, Spike saw Princess Rarity, her natural grace and beauty magnified by her ascension. Then he saw how all the traces of the one she had taken over were everywhere. Statues and stained glass showing the princess who had been and was no more. Every pony who saw her would know she was the one who held the stolen power. The very sun would sing with grief for loss, and she would never be able to escape, except to give the power away or let it consume her, letting the wild power free. Either way, the world would be far worse off, and his self-destructive solution would have been in vain. He couldn't do it now. He couldn't save her that way. With his last hope broken, he collapsed onto the floor. Hands and knees holding him up at the sight of the floor blurred up. Tears streamed as he let the hopeless grief overwhelm him with wails and sobs. When he finally composed himself, and no longer felt like vomiting or breathing fire until the world burned, the room was empty. The ageless pair had slipped out a wooden or arcane door to leave him to his grief. Twilight was waiting when he opened up an upper window of the Ponyville library.
Spike, explain yourself. I have enough problems without you going crazy and desecrating the bones of half a dozen ponies in the middle of the night and then flying off to Celestia knows until early dawn.
Twilight ranted about him as he tried and failed to sneak in without incident.
Have you gone completely insane? Do I need to lock you down and stop trusting you?
Spike knew a good setup when he heard it. If you trusted me, then why didn't you tell me Rarity was dying? The rant continued mutely for several seconds as Twilight failed to come up with a good response, but her mouth kept on moving. After her mind and mouth re-established a working relationship, she said,
Because I was afraid you'd do something crazy rather than follow my instructions.
Spike stared daggers at his mentor and friend, and coughed a few feathers of flame. This time, words failed him. Of course, he had gone and done something crazy after he had pierced the veil of secrecy, but that had mostly been because Twilight had kept him in the dark, and refused to let him help with her work. It often seemed that she was completely blind to the laws of social interaction, even after all these years. In less serious times, he might have tried to shake the crazy out of her ears, like he wanted to do ever since he realized he would be big enough to do so one day. Eventually, he broke the staring match and went to his bed. After pulling off the sheets and wrapping them in a bundle with his pillow, he headed down the balcony to the front door. Twilight watched him go, and at least could pull things together well enough that she didn't need to ask where he was going. The streets were quiet and dark, and it was so late Spike only saw a few windows which still contained the light on his long walk. Between the serious magic before the start of the emotional crash beginning and his round trip by air to the city, he knew walking was far preferable than flying the short distance. When the small hospital's front desk pony tried to protest, he ignored her, walking deeper into the complex despite objections raised. He knew where he was going, and was only mildly surprised to see a pair of unicorn guards, stallions guarding the door he wanted, both intimidating even if they wore scrubs. One of them said in a gruff voice, "Sorry, sir, but nobody is allowed in after hours." Quickly darting in between the two, and able to swat away the two attempts to encase him in a magic field as easily as gnats, he turned to give a small wave. "Good to hear. Keep up the excellent work," he exclaimed with far more elation than he felt, and he quickly left the befuddled charge nurses to make the final approach into Rarity's dark room. With a tiny light, he located the roll-out cot under the bed, and settled himself down upon it, and slept as best as he could. When Rarity awoke, it was a slow chore, struggling to consciousness briefly before rolling over to abandon the attempt and drift off again. Each subsequent nap was shorter, like it was an infinite series with a finite solution. Her ability to sleep summoned, and she sat up in the bed, only then catching the unique smoky scent of a familiar dragon.
Spike?
Decades of being an assistant to a pony who had no concept of normal sleep cycle allowed him to wake from a dead slumber if his name was called in that familiar questioning tone. Eyes snapped open, and he was already rising up to his feet. "Yes, Twilight?" He blinked as the surrounding knocked him painfully into the present. Rarity?" She hid a small giggle of amusement by looking around the rest of the hospital room.
You're here by yourself? Where's Twilight?
She asked, confused at finding the young dragon here alone.
Did you sleep here all night?
She asked, when she looked at his sleep-deprived face, slightly drooping with a tired smile. He held up his taloned hand, ticking off the questions as he answered them. "Yeah, probably still at the library looking for a way to cure you. And no, I've only slept here for a few hours." Twilight raised an eyebrow.
I'm surprised they let you in.
Spike grinned knowingly.
Oh, they said no pony could come in. After a confused stare, he elaborated. Dragon! He said with deliberate slowness, pointing at himself. Finally, he smirked and gave a quiet laugh. Even if it was more of a sarcastic explanation than an actual joke, it was good to hear her laughter. Hooves rubbed at her sleep-encrusted eyes. Rarity had been sleeping for far too often, and when she had dared to leave the bed, she was quickly victim to bouts of dizziness or simply passing out.
I suppose a bit of conversation would be better than flipping through more boring magazines.
He climbed onto the bed, curling up like a scaled feline at the foot of the ridiculously long bed. She barely used half of the bed's length, even if she tried.
So, what have you been up to? He asked, after the silence grew to uncomfortable levels.
Raising a foreleg above her head to dramatically gesture about, she intoned with a tone so haughty she had to be mocking some pony.
Oh, so much, my dear, so much. I reviewed the fashion of this wonderful establishment, but simply failed to find anything inspired. All derivative and tacky. I have even tried to branch out, writing food reviews, but the paper catches fire whenever I write enough about the embezzlement quality of properly capture the feelings.
She dropped her upraised hoof with a small sigh.
But enough about my change of venue. Tell me about what you've been up to since you've got back.
Spike frowned, thinking through how normally Twilight was overjoyed to see him return from one of his little adventures, as she called them, and barely let him leave her side for days. But this time, she had kept him at a distance when he tried to settle back into old routines. Finding out Rarity wasn't well had led him to do so in his own parallel search, and he quickly ruled out all of the natural causes, while additionally figuring out she was steadily declining with no signs of improvement, which had led him on a futile chase that ended up back at the start on a death watch he had resolved to see to the end with a smile. All he could offer now was to make her remaining days happy and comfortable for her, in the vain hope that would be enough to solace the grace the ages to come.
Just boring magic stuff. Nothing you would want to hear about. Did I ever tell you about the time I set Philomena on fire? Apparently, Phoenix and Dragonfire aren't quite the same thing.
Another musical laugh prompted him to go on, telling about one of the more interesting days when he still lived within the great castle, the chaos and the damage repaired and forgiven long before he had even met Rarity. When doctors or nurses tried to usher him out, he refused to leave, simply disrupting any unicorn who tried to magically lift him or otherwise remove him from the room. A small bluff of him suggesting that such a trick would made a permanent affliction was more than enough to flag the courage of the more stubborn ponies. Since he never interfered with any of the futile tests or treatments, they eventually just ignored him. The only acknowledgement of his existence, the wide berth that took when walking around the room. The other visitors came. Most of the time it was her sister, who talked quietly about another day at her internship, a haunted look in her eyes as she tried to look brave for her big sister. Others visited for short times when they could. Applejack and her brother came to her side, looking somber. Neither of them had much to say. When Fluttershy finally braved the hospital to visit her, she took one look at the frail unicorn, old and weak before her time, and she just started crying with incoherent apologies as she hugged at the sheets, wrapping up her dear friend. Each time somebody close to her visited, she looked just a little stronger. Her friends gave her the will to stay awake for their entire visit, but when they finally left, she was asleep moments later. When she was awake, Spike told her stories from before he had moved to the small town he now called home. When those ran out, he talked about the daring acts he had done in his lone adventures across the world and beyond, filling in details he had not shared when they had seemed not so important. In turn, when she could form the words she needed, Rarity told her own stories. Growing up, being a sister to a foal so much younger, how she had moved to Ponyville and made new friends. When she started talking about events they had both been at, Spike could see her reminiscent eyes just how aware she was dying. And every dark night, a quiet echo of the bony dragon whispered in his mind, a countdown to the end. Her deadline inexorably approached. When he could count the days left with his talents, Spike's tales began to be told with an unguarded abandon. Quietly, when he was sure nobody else would overhear, he talked about events that out of fear or kindness he had omitted from any report. He told of the monsters he had run away from screaming. He described the desert oasis so full of peace that he nearly never left its cursed waters. He talked about the stories he had witnessed, only at the edges of his mind returning to the wonder that had happened to those who had been given such a useful item by a passing dragon for a few shiny rocks. After much deliberation, swallowing in nervousness, he even told of his deepest, unredeemable shame. He had been lost for days in an immense forest, wings shredded with a gust that had sent him earthward when he had been skimming over its canopy. He needed a clearing to repair the damage with his fire without causing a wild blaze. And none had revealed themselves, even after he had found a small brook and followed it downstream through thick undergrowth for days. The stag had been old and wounded, yet still a magnificent being, antlers as wide as a full-grown oak. After she stirred, he offered more accurate measurement, the wingspan of a princess. When he saw the dragon, he had tried to flee from the banks of the small stream. Spike hadn't thought about what to do. He had just been following the water, letting the trickling whispers lull him into a waking sleep. His mind referred to old, deep instincts, and he caught the creature before it could limp away. Teeth and talon quickly dispatched at the life, and the ever-hungry beast tried to fill its meat-starved stomach. A flash of memory hit the dragon, showing himself who he really was, a connoisseur of gems and sugar, not blood and flesh. Spike sat on the far edge of the long hospital bed, putting as much space between him and a pony who would surely hate him for the rest of her short life. Arms wrapped tightly around his stomach, feeling nauseous at the memory.
I threw up a lot. I couldn't do anything else. I couldn't apologize or make it right. All I could do was bury him, he whimpered, looking up to not see the horror in Rarity's face, but pure pity. She tried to reach for him, but he stayed where he was, unable to approach any pony in his current state of self-hatred and fear.
I am so sorry, Spike. I really am. Please don't tear yourself up over that. It was just an accident. Every pony makes mistakes.
Rarity spoke quietly, understanding how many ponies already judged him as a half-wild monster. Spike shook his head slowly, rebuffing the comfort weakly.
I'm the accident, not the murder. I didn't throw up because it was horrible. I was just sick from how good it tasted. For weeks I was terrified that I'd wake up one morning to find my real nature took over again and kill somebody in the night.
Rarity smiled weakly, trying to help him find the silver lining.
But you didn't do that, and that's what mattered. We're all born into lives and bodies we didn't choose. We're all like accidents of fate to ourselves.
She took a deep breath and closed her eyes.
I'm sorry it didn't work in time. I must have made a mistake somewhere. I'll look at it soon.
she mumbled, but fell asleep before she explained further. Alone with his thoughts, he watched her sleep, thinking over her reaction to his confession. She had barely been afraid at all when she had been told Spike might turn carnivore again, without warning, like she knew something he hadn't figured out yet. She had tried to comfort him for doing the unspeakable, acting like it was her fault he had loosened his grip on his draconian nature. When Twilight Sparkle quietly entered, his first hint that some pony had entered wasn't any sound of his mentors, but the fact that Rarity was suddenly awake. Almost like she knew some pony important had arrived while she was asleep, and was merely waking up at the same way the others opened the door to meet a planned arrival. Spike looked over to the door where the small librarian stood, her sadness a thick shadow that dulled her coat.
Hi, Spike.
Her fatigue from days of trying to find a solution, even after her dragon assistant had surrendered to the inevitable, left her emotionally drained for the time she spent actually by her friend.
How is she?
He turned to Rarity, thinking he had figured out a small piece of the puzzle. She's doing better than I expected. She was about to explain why something opens up my memories when I start to lose myself. Rarity blinked in surprise and tried to deny it, but being put on the spot was more than enough to fracture any chance of effective deception.
It was just a little thing. I put this spell together after that incident. It was to help you stay gentle, even when you were stressed. The only way I knew how.
Twilight squinted at Spike, as if trying to see his enchantment.
I don't see any spells on him like that,
she finally said, looking over to Rarity in confusion.
Well, dear, of course you can't see it. It's not active.
Rarity said, brushing away the confusion.
Rarity. Spells just don't turn off and on. Once they fulfill their purpose, they dissolve.
Twilight explained very slowly, like she was trying to teach the very basic of unicorn magic. Rarity gave a sly grin.
I figured out a way around that little problem.
Twilight took another look close at Spike, but still couldn't figure it out.
Okay, you win. You stump me. I admit it. Now share this wondrous secret of yours.
The dying designer shook her head back and forth limply. Even in her weakened state, she was just as determined as anyone in the room to have her way.
Sorry, but that's my little secret. I'll have to keep it all to myself, or my last gifts will go to waste. I'm keeping you all safe, even after.
All the pieces were there but one. With the puzzle nearly put together, Spike could see the shape of the last part. Her already unfairly short life cut in half, leaving her to fade away in her prime. Unnaturally vivid memories flooding his mind when his resolve to be good faltered. Dozens of events where one of his friends could have been crippled or killed, yet escaped with nothing more than a few scratches. How a pony entered her room always woke her up, even when they were absolutely silent.
Twilight, this might seem like a silly idea, but just go with it. Cast a life sign finding and filter it just so that Rarity is visible.
She looked at her assistant and nearly pointed out the obvious. She was right there. No need to go looking. She was too exhausted to argue about silly things, so she humored him. Her horn glowed as arcane power flowed, focusing inward rather than out, and after a look at Rarity, Spike, and around her in a full circle, she muttered to herself and repeated the spell, frowning when she got the same result.
That's odd. I guess I need sleep. I must not be applying the conditional property. It still lights you up, Spike, as well as lots of ponies outside.
Spike climbed out of the bed and patted Twilight's back in reassurance.
You didn't make a mistake, I'm sure of it. Now go collect as many of those ponies as you can to convince to get in here, while I deal with her.
He looked at the other unicorn, righteous anger in his eyes. Talons tore at the sheet at the edge of the bed as he roared at her, his small voice a scale model of his race's full might.
Rarity, how could you be so stupid? Do you have any idea what I've been through and to try and save you?
Her eyes opened, but that only encouraged his tirade.
I argued with the princesses. I practically got myself obliterated, summoning up a sapient embodiment of death, just to beg for your life. And you're throwing away your very life on what? Protection charms and friendly reminders?
Rarity shook her head in denial.
I spent a lot of time on sewing them. They'll keep any pony and you safe from almost any harm. They even stopped hurting to make after the first few times. I want some part of me to go on. I don't have any faults of my own. My sister and friends are all that matters. Given them an, I don't know what to call it, was such an easy thing to do without them knowing. The only pony who even noticed was easy to swear to secrecy.
You've got to take them back! You've got nothing left!
Spike yelled, his small talons encircling her foreleg in desperation. Her smile was grim.
Dear, I know how much you care about me. Let me spend my life how I see best. One short life is meaningless in the long run, but dozens of spells which will guarantee long, healthy lives to my friends and pass on down the generations forever. That's something I'm willing to give my life to make happen.
Spike rested his head against her leg, trembling from the conflict of emotions that couldn't bear to stand back as she gave her very life away, expecting nothing in return. When a princess spoke about putting the needs of many above one, it was cold and cruel. But when that one was not only spoke out about it, but enacted the sacrifice in her own calm time over a decade of secretly crafting protection for others at the cost of her own future, it was something else altogether. He could easily see the parallels between them, even if their goals were drastically different. The sheer willpower that pushed her generosity to her own self-destruction matched his fiery crusade that had only been abandoned when the only solution to save her would have contained seeds of far greater destruction. Spike's voice dropped to a whisper, knowing that what he said could save or ruin her.
You have to live. If you don't, everyone who will know about what you did for them, they'll all think, if she has one less friend, she'll still be with us. And they'll all hate themselves for killing you by being that one. That's not a happy, healthy life.
The small dragon gulped, going to confess one of the prices he had been willing to pay for her life to be restored.
I was willing to give as much of my time as you could, but it wasn't allowed. I'll still do it if you stay. Show me how to make them, please. I'll pay the price. I'll pay double, triple. Just don't leave us with this.
Her resolve tried to stay firm against the quiet words, but fractures slowly appeared until the dam broke. Like literal dams, it bursting swept the imbalance it had created on her mental landscape away. By placing generosity above friendship in her own life, and held up by pure will, Rarity had made the quiet town the safest place to live in Equestria, at a dire price to herself and those who loved her. Rarity's face was stained with tears when Twilight ushered in half a dozen confused ponies. The confused long-time Ponyville inhabitants stood around, uncomfortably shifting in the now crowded room. Twilight watched with arcane eyes as her friend's magic reached out to the first pony and began to remove the complex matrix of spells. Woven together with threads spun from the deepest layer of the unicorn's being, it was beautiful, yet grim work of art for Twilight to behold. Within the construct, dozens of threads to life and limb were carefully spelled out, each containing conditionals so simple that the unicorn simply precalculated the variable rather than further complicate the spell. It constantly measured the pony's velocity, altitude, oxygen level, and dozens of internal statistics, always ready to repair a failing lung or injured spleen. The construct was woven about the very pony like another coat of fur, and yet the whole thing worked in a complete magical silence, hiding right below the surface to blend in with the natural order of a pony, invisible to any pony who didn't know exactly what to look for. Each pony got a quiet apology from the bedridden unicorn, along with a quiet plead to be careful. Eventually, she had unwoven all 6 constructs, and the ponies were quietly ushered out with a talk of aforementioned promises of food or other treats. The recovery of life had left the white unicorn almost buzzing and slightly feverish as her body and mind reacquainted themselves with what it meant to be relatively full of life again. Despite the danger of being past for now, doctors desired to keep her for observation. A few hours after the fever had faded away, and with her strength and health returned, her patience with being a patient broke. Finally, she left the hospital with many promises to take things easy and to return at the first sign of a relapse. Spike followed along as Rarity slowly walked back up to the boutique in the early evening light.
I'm sorry, Spike. It made perfect sense when I figured out I could use my skills for making something that could protect my friends. Half a month of my old age, and I knew Fluttershy would be protected from all beasts of the forest which she couldn't stare down. Another few, and Twilight would never lose her horn or other parts of her of her crazy plans. Once I started looking for the possible dangers that could take my friends or sister, I saw so many, and kept improving the protections. I was making and adding another piece on almost a weekly basis, letting my designing go by the wayside to work on a way to protect my friends when they had a close call. It was easy to make sure Rainbow Dash didn't get crippled from her recklessness, but she still had 2 separate close calls with rockfalls where mere luck kept her from being crushed like a bug before I could perfect the part of the protection without needing to spend years of my lifespan to build.
She sighed as she reached the darkened boutique and leaned her left side against the door as she looked up at the high ceiling of the covered porch.
Once you give a part of yourself away, it becomes easier and easier. With 5 of the most beautiful creations on my sister and most of my friends, they became easier to weave and easier to give to ponies who needed them. The total cost just snuck up on me.
Her horn shimmered with a sound and color as she unlatched the door to the main boutique room, dark in the evening gloom.
Thank you, Spike,
she said as quiet noises came from the deserted showroom, erupting into a cheers as the door swung open. Lights came up to reveal the long-neglected room had been cleaned and filled to a comfortable capacity of inhabitants of the village. For a town which had inhabitants with views on fashion that considered a hat on a sunny day a bit much, they had all gone to the efforts of getting dressed up for the welcome home party. The erratic collections of clothing showed that no pony who wore an outfit from the single area of fashion, which was perfect for amusing and inspiring the designer, easily taking her mind of the strong probability that the costumes had been assembled from her vast private collection. She looked out at the small dragon, who still stood out on the porch, with a flourish of her only marginally disheveled mane, invited him inside. As the party peaked with a poofy pink pony expertly orchestrating the milling chaos like an admiral of fun, only a few costume malfunctions took place, resulting in only minor embarrassment, amusement, and damage. Rarity delighted in critiquing the absurd outfits occasionally finding one which actually appealed to her designer's eye. Even Spike managed to find a few pieces of clothing that fit him, even if they were all in their collection of giant hats. Even if every pony there went back to the community norm and saw her work as items for special occasions rather than something to be worn every day, the party was more than enough to show how every pony cared about her as a unique member of their community that they would have to hate it to lose. As the party began to wind down, ponies began to leave, carefully folding their garments as best as they could before departing. When the last few were giving Rarity hugs, Spike considered the possibility of staying behind, wanting just one more night by her side. He knew that even if he managed to hunt down and make her unravel every single spark of life Rarity had torn from herself, it wasn't going to be enough time. Someday, she would be gone, and he would protect the rest. But for now, this pony was more important than the world. The many could take care of themselves. He would protect her. The end.